I'm sure you're probably wondering, do bonds actually reduce the overall risk of my investment portfolio? You've probably heard mixed reviews about this. Well, like most things in life, it depends. So let me explain. I'm Chris Naugle, and I'm here to teach you how to become your own bank. The first thing you got to understand is, what is a bond? And how does a bond differ than an equity? Well, a bond is simply an IOU. If I give you $1,000, you agree to pay me interest on my $1,000 and you agree to pay me my money back in a specific period of time. Essentially, I've just described a bond. It's an IOU. Well, bonds come in lots of shapes and sizes. Okay, some are good, some are bad, some are different. It just depends on what problem you're trying to solve. Let me pick on Treasury bonds issued by the US government. When the Treasury and the Fed decide to print a whole bunch of new money, let's just say $5.1 trillion like they did during the pandemic, what they do is the Fed prints the money and exchanges those dollars with the US government for an IOU. That IOU is called the Treasury bond. So the Treasury prints the money, the Fed issues the money, the monetary supply, to the US government. The US government then gives the Fed an IOU, which is a bond. And they come in different durations because you can do a 2-year, a 10-year, or a 30-year Treasury bond. It just depends on how long you want to wait to get paid back all that money. But during that period of time, there's what's called a yield. That yield is an interest rate paid to you. The yield fluctuates based on the price of the bond. But let me take a step back because now I'm getting into nerdy stuff about what a bond actually is and how they work. The other thing you need to understand is, what is the risk with a bond? Because not all bonds are created equal. That much I can tell you. Treasury bonds, because we already started on that topic, are guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the US government. So when you think about that, that's pretty low risk. Now, you might not think that the government has, a whole lot of faith and credit left, but it's still better than most. But you can also take and invest in junk bonds. They're commonly known as high yield bonds. I like to call them junk bonds because that's exactly what they are. They're IOUs that really are junk, but they pay a high interest rate. So a lot of people are lured into junk bonds or high yield bonds because they want a higher return. And again, it just comes back to, what are your needs and goals? Are you willing to take on the extra risk for the higher return, or is it not worth it? Well, in most cases, depending on when you look at high yield bonds, the risk, or as I would say, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. But it's all about how it's spun and how it's worded. They sell high yield bonds to sound like the greatest thing ever. And in my experience, they're typically not the greatest thing ever. They're usually one of the worst things you can put money into. But back to the low risk side of bonds. US Treasury bonds. They've been around for a long time. The US government has never defaulted on a single bond. And I already mentioned this before, but the duration is just the amount of time you're willing to hold the bond. So Treasury bonds, 2-year, 10-year, 30-year. So you can buy different durations depending on that. The longer the duration, the higher the interest rate you earn, the higher the yield. The shorter, the lower the yield. So these are some interesting things. If everything remains static that I just told you, this would be simple to understand, but it does not. There are a lot of factors that play into the amount that a bond pays and also the price of the bond. Let me give you an example. Right now, 2022, the US government is in the process of raising interest rates because inflation has gotten out of control. So they're trying to make money and borrowing money more expensive to slow down the economy and slow down growth, which will then bring inflation back down. So as interest rates are going up, the price of US Treasury bonds and AAA rated bonds goes down. Think of it as an X, okay? If interest rates are going up, which they are right now, the price of the bonds are going down. That's it. It's very easy to understand. There's an inverse relationship to interest rates. So if interest rates go up, the price goes down, making it a unique buying opportunity. Because when everything's going up, price of everything is going up, the price of bonds is going down. And what do you want to buy? You want to buy low. Warren Buffett says it. Buy low, sell high, and don't lose money. So this is one of the few asset classes that I could seriously say right now, 2022, is a good investment opportunity because you can buy it as it's going down. Because it's absolutely certain that interest rates are going to go up. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of how to make a lot of money with zero risk. Literally, a risk-free return. Let's go back to what I just said. If we know interest rates are going up, because the Fed has already said they're going to raise rates 7 times, which they've already done a bunch, and we know that the price of the bonds goes down, you should be buying bonds. You should be buying Treasury bonds as long as it's within your risk tolerance. So as the price goes down, you just dollar cost average in. Remember, in other videos I've done, I've taught you about dollar cost averaging. Don't try to buy the bottom and don't try to sell the top. Just buy it along the ride. Set it and forget it. That's how I've been buying them. So when interest rates are going up, the price of bonds are going down, we're buying. So now, where is the risk-free return? Well, remember I said it's an inverse relationship. Eventually, what goes down must go back up. So in the comments right now, let me check what you know. I want you to tell me what happens when interest rates go down to the price of bonds. Put it in the comments and I'll answer them later. But let's go one step further. So we know for a fact that everything that goes up must come down. So if interest rates are going up, we know that they must come down sometime. Well, let me explain to you when they will come down. You see, the Fed and the economy will enter a recession. Technically, as of right now, August 2022, we are in a technical recession by definition. But the yahoos and the gurus and the politicians are playing games saying they're changing the technical definition of what a recession really is. Don't buy into that. We're in a recession. The deeper we get into a recession, the more people will lose jobs, the worse things will get, the economy will start to fall apart. When that all happens, what is the first thing that the government and the Fed does? They drop interest rates. Do you remember back during the pandemic? What was the first thing the government and the Fed did? They dropped interest rates. And what did that do? It made money cheap. And then what was the next thing they did? Printed a whole bunch of money. So they increased the money supply. So now you had a whole bunch of extra money in the system that was really cheap to use. What did everybody do? Bought houses, bought boats, bought planes, bought cars, spent money, driving the economy back up very quickly and also driving inflation up with it. So now on the flip side of that, we know what just happened and we know why it happened. When we enter this recession, when your friends, your family, your coworkers are suffering, losing jobs, and really wondering what's next, the Fed will drop interest rates again. So if we know that when interest rates go up, the price of bonds goes down, so what happens when interest rates go back down? Oh, the inverse. The price of bonds goes back up. So if you want to make a whole bunch of money with very low risk, or as what I would say, a no risk return, then you would buy Treasury bonds when they're going down, and you would wait and be patient to when interest rates get pulled back down, and you would sell when the price of your bonds went back up. Does that not make logical sense? It does, but it's not sexy, and it doesn't involve any emotion. It's just mathematics. But I just showed you how to make a whole bunch of money, and I showed you how to do it without taking hardly any risk. So let's do a quick review. The first thing I said is, do bonds reduce the overall risk of an investment portfolio? Well, let's talk about what we went over. Number one, so you understand what a bond is. It's just an IOU. The second thing I hit is understanding the risk, because not all bonds are created equal. Remember I talked about Treasury bonds, which are low risk, and I talked about high yield bonds, which are junk bonds, which are high risk. Then we talked about duration, the amount of time you would have to hold a bond before you get all your money back. And then the fourth thing I went over was interest and yields. I explained how you're paid for that IOU or for owning that bond. And the fifth thing I explained is I gave you an example of how to earn a risk-free return. A return that logically makes a ton of sense, but emotionally isn't really sexy. So if you liked this video, then you're going to want to check this one out. This video is called "The Fed is Not Going to Be Able to Raise Rates Successfully Without Upsetting, I'm going to say collapsing the economy." It falls in perfectly with exactly what we just explained. So check that video out. It'll give you a lot of perspective on why you should be looking at bonds as a piece of your portfolio.